Карл Бушби е околосветски пътешественик, който вече 27 години върви от единия край на света до другия пеша. Англичанин, роден в Хъл през 69-та година. Като тийнейджър постъпва в британската армия и служи 11 години в парашутния полк. След като напуска армията, си поставя необичайна цел да обиколи света пеша, без да прекъсва маршрута си и без да използва никакъв транспорт. Така през 1998 година започва неговата експедиция Голиат. Началната точка е Пунта Аренас в Чили, а крайната – родният му град Хъл, Англия. Има да измине към 60 000 километра. Първоначално Карл смята, че ще успее за 8, максимум 10 години. Реалността се оказва съвсем друга. Пътят му минава през Южна, Централна и Северна Америка, после през Азия и Европа. Най-големите трудности не са физическите, а други. Визи, забрани, граници, войни, пандемии, глад, липса на пари и спонсори. Един от най-известните моменти в пътешествието му е преминаването на Беринговия проток пеша през 2006 година по замръзналия лед между Аляска и Русия. Това е изключително опасен участък с риск от ледени разломи и полярни мечки. След преминаването Карл е задържан от руските власти заради нарушение на граничния режим. Следват години на съдебни битки, откази за визи и дори 5-годишна забрана за влизане в Русия. Много пъти експедицията е на ръба да бъде прекратена. Карл губи спонсори по време на финансовата криза от 2008 година. Прекъсва похода си заради липса на средства. Връща се в Мексико. Чака с години разрешения без да се отказва от основното правило. Маршрутът не се променя и той го върви само пешком. През 2024 година, за да избегне опасни или затворени зони, Карл предприема ново изпитание. Преплува Каспийско море. В продължение на 31 дни плува по около 6 часа дневно, като нощува на лодка заедно с екип от други пловци. Така продължава пътя си към Европа, без да прекъсне линията. През 2025 година Карл преминава през Турция и влиза в България, след това в Румъния. В момента е на по-малко от 2000 мили от дома си. Планира да се прибере в Хъл през 26-та, почти 30 години след началото. Самият той казва, че най-страшно ще бъде не физическото завръщане, а психологическото. Изпитва ужас от постигането на целта си. Историята на Карл Бушби е пример на какво е способен човекът, когато има воля, кураж и цел. Този англичанин е герой, защото никога не се отказва, дори когато светът многократно му казва «не». Това е историята на едно много просто решение. Да продължиш да вървиш. Hello, this is Off News podcast, one of the few free media in Bulgaria. I'm Miss Angelova, and it's a great honor to introduce to you a traveler, an adventurer, a very brave man who spent the last 9 years traveling the world and making his around the world trip by foot, Karl Bушби. Hello.
Hello.
Very nice to meet you.
Thank you for having me.
Very nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Of course. How do you find Bulgaria so far?
Well, it's beautiful. It's very green. I've spent a couple of weeks now in country. I'm loving Sofia, so it's nice to be here to take a rest and chill out for a little while.
I will start with a question that's very important for the world situation and Bulgaria's part in it now. It's because you come from a military type of family. You have a military background, but then it was sort of maybe not so practically connected to our present type of job. And now when the war in Ukraine started and in Gaza and the world is waiting to see if a third world war is coming, how do you feel?
Wow, we're jumping straight into the dark stuff. I like it.
No, it is because we are in the news here. We're always talking about this dark stuff, and it's getting darker and darker.
Hell feels a little dark.
It is, yeah. And with this new administration in the United States, and with this talk between America and Russia, it's getting very, very, very dangerous and actually tangible.
Yes.
It wasn't before when you were in the military, right? It was just...
No, I fortunately enough, my military career, all 12 years of it, was perhaps in one of the most peaceful times we've ever lived.
Yes.
It was that golden era, the end of the fall of the Soviet Union, and everyone had relatively put great wars behind us and thought that they would never happen again.
Hope. Was flourishing.
Very optimistic world. Yeah. How times have changed. But that's not, I mean, if you step back and look at the history of humanity as a whole, these are not that different. This is the normal. This is how the world normally is. That peaceful period was the abnormal.
Right.
So we have to, take a little bit of perspective there. And if you look at the history of humanity, we've always been tearing each other's throats out.
We've always been.
What is the normal situation?
Why? What the human beings could not overcome? What is that?
Evolution demands a competitive creature. So it's in our nature.
But competitive is different than killing.
No, it's not. It's tooth and claw. That's how nature works. Unfortunately, that's the reality of the world that we're in. The difference with humans is that humans have the ability not to do that.
Exactly.
And we strive.
Free will, choice.
We strive and we struggle, but unfortunately, the better agents of our nature sometimes persist and at times fail quite miserably. And we are back into that normal, unfortunately, whereby there are a lot of conflicts right now.
And not only conflicts, I think that the will to actually choose those people to run the whole circus is very, very weird. And in Bulgaria, for example, people don't believe in politics anymore, which is very unfortunate because this way we soon will get into a regime because that's the alternative.
Humans get bored. And we're in a period where we've been peaceful and we have everything we need. We're very comfortable. And humans get bored. And then they start to want to mess with the system. And then they start voting for people like Donald Trump, etc. And they go right. They want a little more fun, get a bit more spicy with it because they're bored.
You think that's the reason?
I think that's, partly what the situation is. If you take any human, it was the same in the army. If you had a group of men and you train them hard for any given situation, and then you kind of put them to one side and just let them linger for long enough, there's trouble because they get bored and they want to go do things, and then it starts to get a little problematic. And in some cases, society appears to be like that because, we've had the best of times, and it just seems like all of a sudden we're kind of bored with this whole democracy stuff, and we want to kind of like up the ante a little bit because it's more interesting, whatever that might mean. And, we'll probably go through a phase. It will be horrible. And then we'll be like, okay, let's not do that anymore. And we like the boring thing again, so we'll go back. And it'll be up and down. And that's how society and how nature tends to work, back and forth. So there'll be periods where things will look bad, but I think it'll sort itself out eventually.
But to continue this to the end, when you entered the army, were you actually facing the idea that one day you might have to kill other human beings?
I come from a military family. When I joined the army at 16, my goal was to fight and die on a foreign field with my boots on. And that to be the best soldier I ever could. I didn't even know how much I was being paid and didn't care because that's not what it was about. I was purely an idealistic young man filled with the glory of death and violence, and we would go and fight and die for Queen and country. That was who I was.
Right. And
that's what soldiers need to be, unfortunately. And, we all kind of grow up, get older and see the world in different ways. And I've seen the world in a very upfront way. So
when you decided to travel the world, I mean, was there a gap or some sort of a personal reason or some sort of a drama reason, or we all go through difficult times in our lives. Was there a decision that you made out of? Was it an escapism sort of type of decision?
Not an escapism, but it was a young man who needed to prove something.
Okay. What did you want to prove?
Well, as a British paratrooper, we go through some extensive testing, and I spent a long time as a recruit, and I had 5 attempts at what we called P Company, which is the selection process for paratroopers. And coming from a military family, it was do or die. So I had to achieve this. And when I couldn't pass, because back then I was a skinny little kid. I had a hard time physically. I wasn't physically mature enough to take on the challenge. And I would fail and then I'd have to redo it. And I stayed within that environment, that recruit company environment, for the better part of 2 years. It should have been 24 weeks. But I did almost 2 years in a brutal regime designed to weed out the ones that can't make it. And I think you don't spend that long within that kind of environment and not come out with a couple of scars, shall we say. Mm-hmm. And once I'd got into the regiment, I just constantly felt like I had to prove myself because I may have been seen as the weak link, the guy who struggled. I always struggled. Physically, I've always struggled to keep up with my peers. So I am not physically impressive in any way. I mean, I've passed the tests, I made the grade, but I've always struggled. So I've always had that as a young paratrooper. This is my version of how I think this whole thing evolved. Within the army, I had this urge to prove myself, feeling like I hadn't yet got to the point where I wanted to be. And I think that within that environment, and again, in the parachute regiment, we do everything on foot. So we do everything with a lot of weight on our backs, long distance, endurance. And within that environment, that ethos, we'd talk about how far can you go? How far can a man go? How far can you go, being self-sufficient and blah, blah, blah. So we'd look at maps and talk about walking across continents and things.
Adventure.
This is how this,
you think, yes.
Evolved. And I was looking at bigger and more demanding routes and talking about it with people. And it was one day my father, who's ex-Special Forces, sent me a birthday card with a note written in the birthday card. And he talked about how a couple of guys in the Special Forces had talked about the possibility of walking from London to New York over something called the Bering Land Bridge, which I'd never really heard of or paid attention to. Because up until that point, the routes, the Americas, Asia, Africa, or whatever, they were 4-5 years. It was never enough of a challenge that would have been worth me leaving my military career for.
Yes.
Nothing special enough. Until one day I got that birthday card and I mentioned the Bering Straits. And then I took a map and I drew a line from the UK all the way out across Asia, over the Bering Straits, all the way down through the Americas, and couldn't understand why anyone would want to stop in New York, and just took it all the way down to the bottom. That line on the map was kind of what we'd been looking for. That's the whole hairs on the back of your neck stand up. That was something worth investigating.
Right.
And once I had that under my skin, I couldn't let it go, because, I would show people this and say, look at this. Theoretically, you could do this entire distance on foot if we could figure out how to do the Bering Strait, that linchpin between all these major continents. And they were like, crazy idea, stupid stuff, you can't do it. Well, if you're going to say you can't do that to a young paratrooper, you're just daring me. And that was kind of how this thing evolved. It's like a bad bet at the bar with me and the guys egging me on and me saying, you know what? I think I can do this. We did the math. Look at the math. The Americas is almost the same as Asia and Europe on its side. So we're looking at 6 years, 6 years. So let's say 12 years. But we have no idea how we're going to do the Bering Strait, what that means. And then we identified these other gaps. So there was just 3 obvious gaps. There was the Darien Gap, the little-known border region between Colombia and Panama. The Bering Strait, the obvious one, right? That middle section, that the crux of the entire journey is if we can get from Alaska to Siberia, then everything is possible. That joins all those continents. And the last one, the last gap being the Channel Tunnel or the English Channel. So theoretically speaking, you can do the whole thing on foot with a little bit of swimming here and there. Of course, what we hadn't foreseen is the Caspian Sea, which is another story we'll talk about later, I'm sure. But so that was the basic concept, was can I do all of that on foot, no transport? And the original plan was to walk from the United Kingdom to the furthest point I could possibly go from my home now, which was the bottom of South America. But it was another guy in the Special Forces, Bronco Lane, who had mentioned the fact that this isn't so much a physical challenge as it is a mental challenge. So he suggested that we turn the route on its end and start at the bottom and walk home, because the closer you get to home, that would give you perhaps the mental edge, right?
Right.
Rather than walking further away from home, you're walking to home. So the closer you get, that might give you the edge mentally. So that's why we started ultimately at the bottom of South America and walking home. Okay.
And you don't use any transport?
Not to advance, right? So when we put this expedition, when I put this expedition together, what we did, we just defined it. You need to define it somehow, what I would do. So we defined it with two rules. Rule number one, I cannot use any form of transport to advance. Rule number two was I cannot go home until I arrive on foot. Now, at the time, two very simple rules, but those rules get mighty complex when they meet the real world. Hence, 27 years later, the fact that we had to stick to those two rules is really what's made this a very complicated and long journey. And the fact that we were not willing to compromise on the route. So wherever I stop walking, I need to start walking from that point.
But, okay, how do you make such a decision in terms of financing it, leaving everything behind? At this point, probably you didn't have a family, but you devoted yourself to something that will probably not allow you to have one, I mean, it's such a life choice that predestinates everything.
It was a big deal. It was a life journey. It was a way of life.
Yeah, but it's not a job, So you decided, which is a great decision.
It is a job.
It is, in a way, it's a job also.
It becomes a job. Yeah, it does.
How do you earn your living?
Right.
How
so
do you
through
eat?
Sponsorship. So my sponsors basically are the ones that look at it. I mean, when you look at how this thing is financed, it's a real mixed bag. When I started this, I had about $500 to my name. That was it. I mean, I literally burned my bridges with the UK. Goodbye. Won't see you until I arrive home. I had about $500 in my pocket. And at the time, Argentina was pretty expensive. That first year or so. So that 500 didn't last very long, and I didn't have any sponsors or support. So at some point, we knew I was going to go into survival mode. Survival mode just means doing what you have to do to get those 30K days. So we started off in Patagonia. Eventually that money would run out. So I knew I had to cross the Andes into Chile, because survival in Chile would be easier, because Chile is green, fertile, and you're on the coast. And if you want to survive anywhere, the coast is probably one of the best regions for survival. So we literally crossed into Chile to go into survival mode, because you're not going to survive in the deserts very well. And pretty much we just lived off the road. I found every day I could find enough discarded food from traffic, or I could find food, apples and berries in the bushes, that would keep me going for 30 kilometers a day. And we managed to do that through South America. Eventually, members of my family, like, for example, my mother, who worked in a chocolate factory, and she would
send you some chocolate.
They would have a whip around. So everybody would put a couple of pennies in, And then at the end of the day, mother would wire me money so that when I arrived in a town or a city, I could, have a meal. And
this is like we have to shoot a documentary about you, but we had to shoot you while you were going. But
yeah, unfortunately, back in these days of South America, there wasn't the media present. There wasn't, we didn't take video cameras. We didn't have phones.
Right.
I wasn't filming it because
it started in 1998.
1998, yes, the end of 1998. So, yeah.
Well, there was no strong internet either. So.
No. Well, there was very limited. So if I wanted to communicate with home, I would have to find a town or a village that had an internet cafe, which was a thing.
Yes, I remember those.
Yeah.
Kids were going there to play.
Other than that, I would send, for example, I had the photographs that I would take were with the small, cheap plastic Instamatic camera with rolls of 35mm film. And the rolls of film would have to get sent home.
Yes.
Literally in the mail.
Yeah.
Along with my diaries. So I would keep a daily diary, pieces of paper and stuff that I would ship home to my father to collect.
But it's great that your father and your mother supported your decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I talk about this journey, I talk about we, not I.
Yes.
Because it really isn't just me. It's the world is has been a support network. Not just family and sponsors and other people, but people you meet on the road as well, who have nursed me back to health when I'm sick, who have given me money, who have given me food, who have helped me with the water and all the rest of it. Even here, the first few days I got here, I had a problem. I'd broken the machine. It needed to be fixed. And people helped me get it to a welder and even paid for it for me.
What type of machine?
The cart that I push. Because I push a cart on wheels. Right?
And that's where your luggage is?
Everything is in there, yeah.
What do you carry with you?
Everything.
Everything?
Too much.
Yeah, like a snail or a turtle. You carry everything.
My house is in a great big collection of stuff on two wheels. It weighs about as much as me, so I'm pushing my own weight during this entire thing. But we did that in the early days. That's how we started, because I understood that I would be in a lot of remote places for long periods of time, a lot of deserts, like at the beginning, Patagonia, the Atacama deserts. So we needed to be able to carry a lot of food and water and stuff. And you can't carry a lot on your back for a long period of time because you're going to injure yourself. So we put it in a machine that I could pull or push.
Okay.
Yeah, and the whole financing thing, we started off, and there were some rough, hungry days where you're not eating. So those early days were pretty tough. Then we reached the border with the United States and things changed. And we kind of expected that. Because now I had about, 4 or 5 years of history behind me. We had proven myself. People had been watching it. And there was a lot of outdoor companies who have a lot of interest, financial interest in North America, not so much Latin America at that time. So you're walking into the, an area where people, what's the word I'm thinking of? Basically where these outdoor companies make a lot of money. So we managed to start making a little bit of cash with some handshake deals with outdoor companies and boot companies and things, and an internet company as well. So once I hit North America, which is very important, I started making just enough money to start eating better and start living. And then once we got to the far north, we were faced with that very expensive northern section. We managed to get a buck deal with all, because I've been, with many years of collecting these daily diaries, a chapter here and there adds up. So we had a stack of paper with diaries from the Americas, and we could then basically, we managed to sell that.
Sell it to who?
Time Warner at the time.
Okay,
Time
very
Warner
good.
was willing to advance the money on a book deal, and that paid for the very expensive northern section. That's into the Arctic, the Bering Strait, and into Siberia.
Do you want to do a movie about you?
No, we're not there yet.
Okay, but
that was
just
just
trying for this.
That was just a book, but very important. So that paid for a big chunk of this, and it was after that, once in Siberia, that we got hit with the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, and I lost all my sponsors. We had some sponsor deals on the table. All that disappeared. And it would be 3 years before I managed to find sponsors again. And it's a production company from Los Angeles, now called Westwood Productions, that have been sponsoring me now for the last 15 years.
Uh-huh.
And they are a production company. So the idea is that they buy the cameras, I film everything.
You do?
They're going to make something with all that footage, yes.
Okay.
So the documentary, the film, the TV series is coming, kind of thing. So that's what they're working on. So that is how this thing has evolved from literally eating trash on the side of the road to very small deals, to a book deal, to proper sponsors.
And in 2001, it took you nearly 2 months of jungle and river travel. What was that?
The Darien Gap, probably one of the hardest things I've done. Very scary, physically.
In general, if you're alone, without any weapons with you, and then it's really, you're threatening your life, right?
Well, yeah, the Darien Gap is a real classic example of just a real boy's adventure dream. So just believe the Darien Gap is the border region between Colombia and Panama. And it's that narrow little gap where South America touches Central America. And at the time, it's a war zone. So you've got FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, fighting the Colombian government on 60 fronts throughout the entire country. And this was the 35th front. And they controlled the jungle. Very important to them because it's where the drugs are going out and the guns and money is coming in. So it was... The Darien Gap at that time was just this crazy mix of insurgency, counterinsurgency, narcotics and counter-narcotics. Every man and his dog was in there for some reason, nefarious reason, and it was just lawless for a large part of that. So getting through the Darien Gap was a big deal. And it was a real danger.
Also psychologically, in a way.
Oh, yeah. But being an ex-soldier, this was our thing.
Right.
So as far as me and father were concerned, this was what we would refer to as an escape and evasion exercise. A lot of people were going into the Darien Gap and getting killed. There was lots of stories. Backpackers found dead, full of bullet holes. People were being kidnapped and going missing. At the time, Colombia was the kidnapped central of the world. So just getting through Colombia had been a challenge. But the Darien Gap specifically was this very, very dangerous place. At the time, the British press referred to it as the darkest place on earth. So the plan was basically there was a road journey where once you leave Medellin in Colombia, you get about 50 k's out, you're on the front line, and there's all these different groups. There's FARC, there's the right-wing paramilitary groups fighting FARC and apparently fighting the army fighting everyone else. And it's all along this road system of towns and villages that FARC take, and then the army take them back, and then the FARC take them, and the army take them back. So you've got all of this death and destruction up this road until eventually you have to break off the road to get into the jungle. And there are no tracks or roads through the jungle. The jungle is the realm of the FARC guerrillas, and it's where the cartels have their plantations that are defended and taxed by the guerrillas to make their money. So it's a really, not just that, but this actual jungle itself, secondary jungle, the Darien Gap, is really bad, dense jungle. And to a point where there was actually only one route to get to a large river called the Atrato River, which separated Colombia from the Darien Gap kind of thing. A huge river, a kilometer wide in parts. And we had to get to that river and then get, like you say, I had to float for 4 days down the river until we could find firm enough ground to get out into the jungle. Because either side of this river was like 40 kilometers swamp.
With what?
Well, you just, what I did at the time is I had managed to get a combat vest from the Colombian army, and I could put bottles in it.
Okay.
And that became basically a flotation vest. And then my backpack, I could throw some plastic bags.
You can catch a cold.
And then that would float. And then what we did is we just camouflaged everything, because in these jungle rivers, you have a large amount of mangroves and stuff, like big patches of greenery that's just floating in these rivers, normally in the middle of the river. So we could camouflage myself and then mix with it and then float. And the river would take me where I need to go. The problem being that this was a combat zone. This was the front line of the fighting. So, and the rivers are the highways of the jungles. You can't travel in those jungles. You use the rivers. So both friend and foe use those rivers. And it's very easy to get caught in those rivers, just floating down a river. So I had to camouflage myself, mix with the greenery, and then just float for 4 days. Without doubt, the easiest part of the journey, right? So I would just spend 4 days floating. At night, I would crawl out, hammock in the jungle, get back in the next morning, flow all day. And that was the plan. And it worked. And eventually we get far enough into the jungle that you then start the hard work, which is you get into the jungle, and then you have to head for the Panamanian border, which is up like in the mountains, and then down the other side into the Darien part of Panama. All the time we're doing this to avoid.
We are who?
Me. I say we a lot, right? It's the royal we.
We a lot.
Yes,
like
because
king
remember what I said about how
of Great
the
Britain.
world is a support network.
I know,
It's
yeah.
never just me.
You're not a lot. You always say we.
Yes. And I will always say we, because it is a we thing. It's not just me, right? I mean, family, friends, sponsors, everyone I meet on the road has helped me. Always.
Right.
And I couldn't do this alone. No one's doing this alone. You might be the guy doing the walking, but there's an awful lot behind you keeping you upright and moving forward. So it's definitely a we thing. Yes. Never forget that. But yes, so the Darien Gap, so you're avoiding the guerrillas, and there were a couple of close calls. I ended up at gunpoint a couple of times. And then eventually once you get into the Panamanian side, the Panamanians are also fighting with the FARC guerrillas, because the FARC guerrillas live on the Panamanian side of the border in those jungles to avoid the Colombian army. And they are raiding those villages and towns on the other side for medicine and supplies and stuff. So there's a line on the other side as well where the Panamanians are fighting with FARC. And when I got so far into that jungle, into Panama, you then meet that defensive line. And I came out of the jungle in a green uniform and a combat vest and met them kind of face to face. And there was a very tense standoff. And that's when I ended up doing the first 18 days in jail while they figured out who I was. Even though the British embassy knew I was coming, because those borders are closed because of the fighting.
How do you arrange all those visa problems, all those crossing the borders type of...
In these situations, there is no organizing. You get there and then you talk to them nicely.
Say, I'm good.
Right,
With a white piece of cloth.
Pretty much. And in our case, it was 18 days in jail where they figured it out who I was. Because, it's all, like I said, all the counterinsurgency and stuff and counter-narcotics. So everyone wants to know who you are.
Now you can get into jail even if you try to get into the United States of America, so...
Right. And there are people, even, it's very different today. The Darien Gap today is known because of the human trafficking routes right now. And back in my days, there was none of that, except there were smaller groups of individuals that were trying to get through. When I got picked up by the Panamanians, I ended up getting put into that system. So I ended up getting put into jails with a lot of migrants, undocumented migrants that were getting scooped up on the other side. And that's who I spent my time in jail with. And what's
the worst thing in jail you experienced?
Worst thing in jail? actually, it's not
they feed you.
Pleasant. They feed you.
It's warm. It's not raining. You're not in a river.
You're not in the river, exactly. But
it's not minus 15 degrees.
It was a little stressful because, they wouldn't allow me to talk to anybody. So I had no communications. I was just in a cell, first of all, with 5 other guys.
Even not a lawyer?
Oh, no, nothing. So I was just on my own at that point. And, there's just, the toilet is a hole in the middle of the floor. And that's pretty much it. And I didn't know anything until I managed to get to speak to the head of the intelligence.
Do they speak English?
Some of them did, yeah.
Do you speak other languages?
I was picking up Spanish.
Okay.
It wasn't great, but it was enough. I could have some basic conversation.
So you managed then? What did he say?
We managed fine. So I ended up meeting the head of the intelligence there, who took me aside and had a couple of questions. And when I realized the types of questions he was asking me, basically he was looking for intelligence on what was going on in the Darien Gap on the other side of the border. And I had extensive experience. On my way up through Colombia, I had lived and stayed with Colombian soldiers. I had stayed with right-wing paramilitary groups. Are you like when you meet those people? What are you talking about? I mean, are you into the soldiers?
Well, yes.
Well, for me, it was great. I mean, I got on with the soldiers.
I know. I mean,
so because my military background.
How do you get along? You just enter into a group of soldiers. Hi, I'm traveling.
Right. One example was to get to the river system. Right, I had to get between two villages. The village on the river, a place called Rio Sucio, was under siege by FARC, and there was one track that led to another village that was forget the name now, Bakura. Anyway, but this other village was occupied by the army and the right-wing paramilitaries, and I had to get permission from the right-wing paramilitary boss at the time to be there, and then to leave this village on a track through the jungle. There's one track, the only way to get to Rio Sucio. But that track was owned by FARC. So it was a very dangerous 60-kilometer journey.
How do you get this research in this moment? Because it's early, the internet is not working. How do you do your research?
I'd done all my research back in Medellin, Colombia. We spent a couple of months looking at the situation. But you don't really find out the details until you get on the ground.
Right.
In this particular case, this track, I didn't even know this track had existed. Only once I'd got into this region, I was then led to this one track. But, I got permission from the right-wing paramilitaries. I then got stopped by the army trying to leave, which is kind of strange because you're walking into a track. On either side, there are Colombian soldiers in trenches with their guns downrange, watching this gringo walk past them onto a track that's held by FARC. And they all looked at me and like, hey, are you stupid? What are you doing? So they jumped out of the trench and they're like, no, you're not going down that track. And they took me to meet their commander, and I spent the evening with him. And eventually they came to the conclusion that they couldn't stop me, but we had to do eventually the next morning, we used a dictaphone, and the commander explained to me the danger, and I had to agree that I was doing this on my own accord. They got it on tape. I signed some paperwork, and they let me go. They put a radio call through to the troops in Rio Sucio and said, there's an idiot coming with a backpack. If he makes it, let us know. And that was that. And off I went down this track. Said goodbye to those soldiers. And it was halfway down that track that night. There was a patrol that apparently, according to everyone, was FARC that passed close to me while I was hiding in the jungle that night. Again, as an ex-soldier, we're doing things what you would call tactically. So I'm living hidden, no light, no sound, cold food, that kind of thing. And if you don't, this is a perfect example of how you get captured and killed in these places. Because at last light in that jungle, then it was like a 20-man patrol passed me on that track, and that would have been FARC. And then the scariest thing was the next morning I had to get on that track and head in the same direction that those FARC troops had been on. And in the jungles, as a soldier, it's all about who can fire first and fire the most bullets wins, to ask the questions later, because it's all very close combat.
But you don't have
that was scary.
Weapon.
I have no weapon, no. So, but potentially walking into an ambush on that track was absolutely terrifying. So that was a very scary part of the journey. But eventually I made it to Rio Sucio, met up with those troops in defensive positions around Rio Sucio, and stayed with those guys for a couple of days, while I figured out how to navigate the river section. But that's how, I would sit with the troops and we would have discussions and talk, and the troops talk and say things that maybe they shouldn't. Like, And I understood, because my background as well, I knew how things work. So I knew the weapons, the radio systems. I was following their discipline and how all of that, it was all, to me, it was just interesting, right? And then you would sit with a commander and have a conversation with him, and he'd get his map out. We'd compare maps. Well, on his map is military symbols. Everything I understand. So I'm looking at his map, and I'm just like a skinny kid with long hair and all the rest of it. So he probably doesn't really think that this kid's going to figure all this out. But I'm looking at his map, and I'm getting a wealth of information. On where the enemy is, where the HQs are, the front lines, where the people are moving. So I'm getting all that information, and I collect all this out of interest. So when I get into Panama, and the intelligence officer says, "Could you possibly tell me anything about this?" I'm like, get me a map, get me a red pen, get me a blue pen, get me a black pen. And I just put all this information on the map. And he just loved it. And I was his best friend. And then he got transported to a bigger jail, like 100 people in this big compound in the jungle. And they put me in this jail with all these, and they were low-level criminals. We're talking about thieves and sex offenders and this kind of thing. The murderers, they go to Panama City. But when the intelligence officer one day was visiting and he saw me in that jail, he made the police take me out of the jail and they kept me in the canteen, the police canteen, which was like, for special punishing. So he looked after me. And after those 18 days was up, then, they figured out everyone was happy and they let me go. Then I went back into the jungle to the village where they'd picked me up, because they took me out of there by helicopter. But remember, I can't use any transport. So I had to go back into the jungle to that village called Boca de Cooper, where they had taken
No compromises.
No compromise. I went back there, found the police chief. He signed the paperwork to say that I came back on that day.
You're crazy.
Turn around, then go back out of the jungle to get back onto the first road that gets you to Panama City. So that's just one part of the Darien adventure, but it was interesting.
The map thing, I'm sorry, I'm talking about myself in this moment, but I was also a kid. I was finished my master's in broadcast journalism in New York, in CBS. The chief of the news is meeting me, and I had this chance, and he's opening a map, and he's like, now, the war in Kosovo is going on. You're from Bulgaria. You should tell me now who is Slavic, who is Muslim, where America was involved in this war very aggressively. And that's how I got to be a producer at CBS Morning Show.
Because you knew.
Because I knew, maybe. I didn't.
Paying attention.
But I was from this region, and I knew what's going on, actually, maybe better than they did. Right. I knew some Serbian, and I mean, war's been part of our lives, even if we didn't actually notice all the time.
Yeah, to me, it's always been geopolitics and etc.
But how do you get informed throughout the way? That's very important for you, as we see. You have to know who is the enemy, who is against who, what's going on in the region you're stepping in, right?
Well, today, that's easy.
Well, today, yes, but in 1958, no. No,
it just took a lot more legwork. For example, the Darien Gap. In Medellin, I spent a couple of months, and you would just talk to everybody you could. You'd interview police, the army, people who had worked in the Darien area, and slowly but surely, you just put together a plan based on information, and that's simple enough.
But do you still keep some of those friendships? Do you write to people? I mean, do you have contact with all those thousands of people who
well, no, not everybody, but not everybody. Special individuals, yes, for sure.
What happens if you fall in love?
Well, Medellin, Colombia was one of those times.
And what happens? You just leave?
That was a 7-year relationship that struggled and unfortunately just couldn't work.
Oh.
That's how it...
Was she traveling with you?
We couldn't get her to travel with me because she was Colombian. And north of Colombia, outside of Panama, there was no other country that would accept them at the time because of the war in Colombia and the refugee problem. The fact that people would, enter the US, Canada, or even Mexico on a visa, a tourist visa, but would never leave. And it was getting expensive, so governments basically just closed the door to the Colombians. So I couldn't get, her name was Catalina, to join me. And the friction and the tension, I would go back and see her for some time.
It was a long-distance relationship.
So, but those things, are very hard. And the further north I was getting, the harder it got. And eventually she moved on. So I don't get the girl.
Oh.
Doesn't happen, and that's not the last time that would happen. So it's if you're looking for a partnership, this is not the career to do that. That's for sure.
Career is a good way to put that. How I was wondering all the time, where do you bath when it's very cold? Where do you sleep? I mean, these are important parts.
Yeah, the day to day. I mean, now every environment is kind of different, but I mean the routine's pretty simple here. I do 30Ks. I mean, I used to do 30Ks. It's slowing down a little bit now, but you walk 6 or 7 hours a day. Wherever you are, at the end of the day, you find somewhere to put your tent. Means getting off the road.
Tent is fine if it's not minus 30 degrees in this place at this moment.
Same if it's minus 40 degrees Celsius. It's the same routine in the Arctic, I guess, but, different equipment and just a lot harder. But that's what you do. You do your day and then you pitch tent. Cook and eat, sleep, get up, repeat. And you just keep that going.
Bath?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Not as often. Warm climates are easier to do that in rivers and things, but once you're up north, no, you won't be seeing water for weeks, a month or two.
What happens when you get sick?
You struggle.
You struggle.
I mean, what do you define as sick? I mean, if you have a flu, a bad cold,
not a flu, really
stuff,
sick.
But really sick. There was one example, really sick, because back in South America, I'm living off trash. So lo and behold, not surprisingly, I got a really bad stomach infection. And that stomach infection, even though I was taking antibiotics, wasn't enough. So it metastasized over a couple of months. So a couple of months, things got really bad. And I got to the point where I would walk 10 paces, double up in pain.
Oh.
Get up, walk, double up in pain. And things were pretty rough.
But don't you go to a hospital? Don't you have medication?
I'm on my way to a town at this point. I think it's Chiclayo in Peru. And some guy stopped in a car. He'd seen me in the newspapers. And he invited me to stay with him and his wife once I got to Chiclayo.
Nice.
Great. So, I rocked up at his place. Just so happens that his wife is a doctor running an analysis clinic.
Oh.
So, the God's will. I show up, they look at me, do a blood test. Yeah, I'm sick. This stomach infection was really bad. There were secondary infections because of it. Things were getting worse. So they just hammered me with antibiotics, put me in bed for about a week, and nursed me back to health. That global network, that we thing, right? It's people helping me along the way. Those guys nursed me back to health, spent some time with them, and then carried on.
And amazing.
And that was just one example of just dealing with sickness. But other than that, I've been very lucky and haven't had any real illnesses. Not like typhoid and malaria and all the things that people pick up in this part of the world.
Yeah.
But being careful, I've managed to avoid.
We'll get to the COVID moment, but before that, in Bering Strait crossing in 2006, you said twice we thought we were going to die.
Not on the Bering Strait, but Alaska was getting to the Bering Strait.
Okay,
was another adventure. It took me months to get across Alaska because we had to do this during the winter. We couldn't do it during the summer months. The Arctic, the tundra, the muskeg, it's very difficult to move in that environment during the summer. It's too wet, too boggy. So everyone travels during the winter months. When all the rivers freeze, those become the highways. So those are the most direct. Logistics becomes easier and cheaper. So you move up winter. In fact, you move late winter, spring. But for me, it was a bit of a learning process. Had a really hard time. And there were a couple of stories along the coasts of Alaska, getting through the center of Alaska and then along the coast, and that were, there was a couple of, oh my God, I think I'm going to die moments before we even got to the Bering Strait. Pretty intense environments. We're talking temperatures where the coldest still air temperature was like minus 51 Celsius at one point. And there were one occasion where there was me and a guy that I'd teamed up with, Dimitri Kiefer, who was going to do the Bering Straits with me. We were on the coast above Nome, Alaska, and we had minus 40 Celsius temperatures, but we had a really strong storm front come in. The winds picked up, and with the wind chill factor, we calculated the temperature at minus 98 degrees Celsius with the wind chill factor, and it was a bad day. In fact, he got frostbite in 3 of his fingers. He took his gloves off for a second, this guy that I was with, just to do something, glove back on, but he lost the tip of his 3 fingers. Anything exposed to the air in those temperatures is going to get killed. So those are pretty demanding environments they'll be living in and moving in. But that was Alaska. Yeah.
And then Russia?
By the time we got to Russia, I mean...
You didn't go through the correct entry.
Well, okay, so the Bering Strait. We arrived in Wales, Alaska, on the tip of the Stewart Peninsula. Now you're just on the opposite, the closest point to Russia you can get in the Americas. And there we were putting together a plan to have a go at the Bering Strait. Now, we needed a number of things. We needed the right weather conditions. We needed a visa for Russia. And we needed something called a propusк.
Пропуск.
A special document for Chukotka, the region of Russia that we were going to try and get into. It's a very restricted part of Russia because of its proximity to the evil empire on the other side. But we couldn't find information from anyone or anything, any websites or anything from Russia about what this propusк was. We went to a travel agency in Seattle, Washington, the United States, to get the visa. We went in there to this company, special travel agency. We gave them the Bering Strait plan, and they would indent for the visas. They got the visas. They had our passports, and they got the visas. They gave us the visas back, our passports back with the visas in them, but they didn't tell us that they changed the plan, because they didn't take us seriously. Obviously, those idiots are not going to go across the Bering Strait, right? They're just stupid people. So they told the Russians that we were flying into Vladivostok or whatever, like tourists. So, of course, we got the visas. But we didn't know that. We thought the Russians had seen the Bering Strait plan and given us the visas. Okay, there's a tick, all right? Good. The propusк thing, we were running out of time and we couldn't figure it out. But it wasn't a problem, because we were never going to get across the Bering Strait. No way, right? I, for one, did not believe that I was going to get across the Bering Strait first time. No one believed we did. I'd bought into that. This was going to be a learning process. No one had ever walked from Russia to America, and we were going to have to figure this out. So I was going to step onto the Bering Strait, hit it like a brick wall, bounce off it, lick my wounds, reorganize and figure out another strategy. That was what I expected to happen. So the day that I step onto the Bering Straits with Dmitry, the 2 things that concerned me the most was, 1, not dying. How do we get off this thing alive? And 2, how was I going to afford to keep trying this? How long could we do this for? So the idea was to learn as much as we could. But we went for it. We had the equipment, we'd trained, we'd spent a lot of time on the strategy based on what other people had tried and failed on. So we just went for it. And it turned out that the gods were willing. They were with us again on this one. And we really got lucky with the conditions. I always describe it as being like Moses watching the Red Sea part. It was spectacular. So we got onto the Bering Straits, and sure enough, we got into this mix of ice and seawater. We couldn't make any progress west and got dragged north for about 50 kilometers. At that point, there was so much open water, etc., that I was like, yeah, okay, this is the kind of thing that we were expecting. The team that tried it the year before us, a Danish Arctic explorer, done North Pole, South Pole, and his partner had climbed Everest and K2 and all the rest of it. Experienced guys. These were the professionals, the adults, as you might call, well-equipped, well-sponsored. And they had got onto the Bering Strait and been dragged south for 8 days before they were rescued. So, getting across the Bering Strait didn't look like it was going to be an easy task. Even though it's just like 57 miles as the crow flies, you can see Russia from Alaska. You can see the tops of the mountains in Russia. It's that close. But in our case, we got dragged north, and I thought, okay, this is how this is going to be. And then it stopped, and it brought us back. At this point, the temperatures, because it's now late March, which is the best time to do this on the strait, the temperatures were about 0 degrees Celsius. And that makes conditions difficult because nothing's freezing and it's soft. And sea ice is like soft and pliable, and it's very difficult to work on sea ice in these conditions. And then the temperatures dropped to like minus 35 or something, which is unusual for that time. And that put a surface on the sea ice, because sea ice starts to freeze around minus 40 degrees Celsius, not at 0. So now life was getting easier. Things were starting to firm up. We had some solid ground to walk on, and we started to make progress. And before we knew it, we'd managed to cross the date line, the border with Russia, America, and people don't seem to realize that the United States has a border with Russia. And we crossed that date line, and we ended up in Russian waters. This was a miracle. And at that time, not just the temperature dropped, but the winds stopped as well, which for this part of the world is pretty unusual. And it's the wind that really kind of drives the ice and breaks it and smashes it together and keeps things moving. So all of these things were conspiring in a positive way. And before we knew it, we were in Russia. Now, as we started to try and head for the Cape Dezhnev in Chukotka, that piece that sticks out in Russia, if you think about it, the closest point, we started trying to aim for that. But then the ice started to take us back north. So it's almost like you find ourselves on a conveyor belt, on an escalator, trying to walk up a downward escalator. So you're kind of like just staying in the same spot. So things got difficult. We had a difficult time. We were carrying a lot of heavy sleds and stuff. And so we made a couple of changes to that, ditched a lot of equipment. And then we had one really, because we were only making maybe a couple of kilometers a day. Very, very tough. This, not just the open water, but the crushed ice and all the rest of it. You're climbing and very hard going. And then one day we got 11 kilometers one day. Phenomenal. And that put us within reach of the Russian coast. And it wasn't long after that, the next day maybe even, that we reached something called fast ice. The fast ice is the ice that's stuck to the shore. Mm-hmm. So around the coast, you have a big section of ice that doesn't move, where the rest of it is all kind of moving around. So we got to the fast ice, and that was it. That was like, this is ours. We've got this. We're going to make it to Russia. No one's ever done this before. So we were like, holy crap. So that day, the next day, we got within about 500 meters of the Russian coastline, and it was my birthday. But we decided, because the weather at that point was closing, we were losing light, so we just camped that night and then came in the next morning. We got up and walked onto Russian soil, and we just made history.
Absolutely.
And things were about to get interesting. So then we walked into the nearest village in Russia called Uelin on the other side. And at first, the Russians just kind of looked at us strangely and ignored us. And then the town mayor showed up and was questioning us, and he couldn't understand where we'd come from. And we're trying to explain. We just walked across the strait, and they were like, bullshit. No one walks across the strait. What are you talking about? And then the border guards came, so they have border guards out there on one of the Diomede Islands, the island in the middle of the Bering Strait, and on the peninsula. And so they turned up, they interviewed us, they were very confused, they went away, and then they came back with reinforcements, armored vehicle, and guns, and basically put us under, not arrest, but we were detained. And then we would spend the next 57 days put on trial, interrogated. A first trial, we were found guilty of. These weren't serious crimes.
Trespassing.
Kind of like entering a country without an official entry point. The big problem was, of course, the visas were fake, so to speak. So immediately the FSB was absolutely, the border guards were convinced. Guy with a military background, family in the military, special forces, We had some military connections in the United States just through my sponsors and stuff. All of this, added up to something nefarious as far as the Russians were concerned. And this story about walking across the Bering Straits, well, they weren't buying it. Obviously, a submarine had dropped us off on the coast.
Of course.
So, yeah, we were in the thick of it at that point. And then it became a political drama. So, politicians got involved. But again, luck of the gods. The governor of Chukotka, Russia, was a guy, oligarch called Abramovich, who just happened to have a lot of interest in the UK, included a big football team, Chelsea Football Club. So he had a lot of interest in the UK. It just so happened that the member of parliament from my hometown was deputy prime minister at the time. So these guys were able to make this political drama kind of go away.
Very good.
And we had a retrial, and I was allowed to basically return to Russia and continue from that point on. So things were pretty close. The border guards and the FSB wanted
to spend the rest of your life in the Russian prison.
They wanted to hold me in jail for 5 years at least. They were in the courtroom. They were trying to get me in jail, but we managed to get away with that and come back into Russia numerous times, while I then had to make my way through Russia under a heap of pressure from the FSB up until a point.
Then in Mongolia, what was that story in 2017 with camels in Mongolia?
Yeah. So we made our way, eventually got out of Russia. That took us 10 years.
How was it in Russia back then?
I mean, it was tough. It was very hard.
It's a very, very poor and sad place.
That part of Russia, far northeastern Russia into Siberia, you'll see like visions from, the old Soviet Union. And it's pretty rough. But I mean, again, I had a lot of help, a lot of great people, met some friends on the road. Definitely not the security apparatus. They were not my friends. But eventually we managed to get out of Russia into Mongolia. Came through Mongolia up to Ulaanbaatar. Ulaanbaatar, I met an English guy who was staying with some Mongolians. We hung out. We drank wine all night. And this young woman, a Mongolian woman, was a feisty young thing. She liked mountain climbing and stuff. And she had talked about the possibility of using camels, which, they still use quite a bit, down the Silk Road into Europe.
Can you use camels?
I can use
under your conditions.
Yeah,
I don't use animals.
I don't ride them, so I've used animals as pack animals.
Right, you don't.
I used a horse and a donkey in South America in the Andes Mountains, and that was my first experience with pack animals. And then so we had this weird thing where, at the time, I was feeling a lot of pressure because I was alone, and that loneliness kind of chews away at you and it puts you under a bit of pressure. And all of a sudden, I had this opportunity to work as part of a team.
Mm-hmm.
And so things got quite exciting. There was these Mongolians, there was this incredible camel journey down the Silk Road to Europe, the longest camel journey of its kind. And this is interesting. So I thought about it. I've spent all night on wine because the best ideas happen over a bottle or two of wine. And then, I proposed this idea and everyone got excited. I went to my sponsors because at this point I had these guys from Los Angeles and said, hey, how about we do this thing with the camels? I'm going to need a little bit of cash. So they give me $5,000 and they said, look, that's all we're going to give you right now. Figure it out. So we ended up going to the Camel Association Camel Association in Mongolia. And they sold us a bunch of camels. I bought 10 male young camels, and that we then had to train to work as a team, as pack animals. And at the same time, we got a team together. There was another British guy, Jamie Ramsey, and Angela Maxwell, an American woman, two other Americans, and then German guy joined us. And there was two Mongolians, the original Mongolians, that we put the plan together with. So there was this international team and these camels, and we were going to try and get these things to Europe, down the Silk Road, like they used 1,000 years ago or something. And this was this great romantic idea of doing this. And it sounded and looked fantastic, and we pitched it. The Mongolian government got behind us, and
Great.
And all we had to do was work out the politics with these other countries, because we had to get 10 camels across.
With the camels there.
So things were complicated, and we were kind of hoping that China might be able to help us with that because of their relationships with all of these countries on the Belt and Road initiative thing that they had going on. So we were kind of like potentially looking at doing that. But we got through Mongolia, and well, most of the way through Mongolia, but unfortunately, the Mongolian girl that I originally started working with had some serious problems, and things went badly wrong, shall we say. And I had to abandon the whole idea, unfortunately. So we had to let that go, sell those camels, and I ended up carrying on my own again. So that was a failed attempt.
To the Caspian Sea swim in 2024.
So then we keep going through Asia, out of Mongolia, through China, to the Xinjiang province. Now that was a story, because that was that particular province of China is that controversial region with the Uyghurs and the re-education camps and everything. So that particular region of China is locked down hard as a police state, like nothing you've ever seen. It's incredible.
And the internet is not. Google is forbidden.
I was allowed to use it for a while, and then the police stopped me because they were watching me online. Like in that part of China, there's no such thing as privacy. You arrive at the border.
Now you can imagine what we lived through before 19...
I mean, you hear people talking about Europe as a police state or America, and you're like, you have no idea what a police state is until you go to this part of China. They've done an incredible job. But the first thing you do is you hand over your phone, and and your passwords, and they plug in your phone, and they upload the software so that they can see everything that you type on your phone. And if you're like the locals, the Uyghurs, if they get caught with a phone without that software on it, a black van turns up, you go in the back, and you're gone. Because that's like a second or first-rate terrorist offense in that part of the world. But for tourism, you're allowed a little bit of leeway, but you get that thing on your phone. So there's absolutely no such thing as privacy. And then they left me alone. I got so far into the Xinjiang. And then once you get down into the central region, where the regional capital is, Urumqi, you're entering this like rings of security nets. So you get in there, and then they start to follow you in unmarked cars. And then eventually they picked me up, they took me out, and they said, look, we can't let you continue. We're going to have to kick you out. And there was just one day of just real hard trying to negotiate, because this was a real problem. I can't go back into Russia. Like, I have to get through China, and the Chinese are kicking me out. So this looked like the end. I mean, it was really bad. And the Chinese were like, nothing we can do. And then at the last minute, the British embassy intervened. And I think the Chinese were just like, we can't be bothered with the paperwork. Okay, we'll do a deal. So the deal is that they have someone with me 24/7.
Nice.
So there are people walking with me or driving with me, the police. And then at night, they take me off the road. They put me in a hotel. And the rooms, either side of me in the hotel, there are police staying in each room.
At least you can have some rest.
And if I step outside the hotel door, those police have to be with me. So it's kind of like crazy. And then at one point, I'd used the internet, sent pictures home, and they knocked on my door the next day and said, look, we don't like what you're doing on the internet. You're no longer allowed to use the internet. And they took all my equipment off of me, sent it away to forensics. And this was what it was like in China. And it was difficult. Like, you felt this pressure, this constant pressure with this people just,
we hear you
into your pockets, and everything that you're doing, they were all over you.
Oh my God.
All the time. And there was no way out of it. So it was pretty stressful. And then eventually, Kazakhstan, and then into Turkmenistan, down to the border with Iran. So my goal was to go through Iran. I'd always wanted to go through Iran. I was really looking forward to that, but we understood that this was going to be a problem. Unfortunately, this was the end of 2019. I arrived on the border with Iran, and just at the time that the Iranians had hit a couple of oil refineries in Saudi Arabia, there was the talk of war. The politics was getting hot. So I came I basically ended up flying back to the United States with my sponsors while we tried to figure out how to do this next difficult thing with Iran, because my sponsors couldn't be involved at all. They couldn't fund it because of the sanctions as a US company. So we were going to have to really try and figure out. So we had to try and find someone in Iran willing to work with us, which was very difficult. And we managed to find someone who worked at an Iranian embassy who said that he could help us organize what would have to be.
It's hard work, actually.
Oh, it's
Aside
great.
from
There's a lot of planning.
The
hardest part is politics and finances and stuff, for sure. Because we would need an escort for 4 months through Iran. And the Iranians were like, no, you're not going in for 4 months. You're on a British passport. You're lucky if you get a week with an escort. So we had our work cut out. And while we were working on that, and things were progressing, we'd worked out how much it would cost. The Iranians had agreed. They were looking at getting the visas and a team together. And then the Americans put a hellfire down the windpipe of Suriname at the airport in Baghdad. Boom, gone. Everything disappeared. The Iranians wouldn't talk to us anymore.
And?
So now it's winter or Christmas 2019, 2020. Nothing we could do. We tried
it all.
So now we're basically waiting that winter, trying to make recontact. I'm waiting and waiting for relationships to calm down, for the fire to come out of the geopolitics. And then it comes spring 2020, we made contact with the Iranian guy who agreed to try again. And then COVID just came like a sledgehammer. And the first country to get knocked sideways outside of China, lo and behold, was Iran. So bang, that thing just came in like a wrecking ball, just again as we thought we were going to make progress in, and that was it. It just took everything off the table. And like everyone else, come COVID, we were just stuck now, in the Americas, just now what? Nothing we could do. So it would take 3 years to get back on the ground. I think was it 2022? We were looking at trying to get back after all the various versions of COVID had shut down the borders in Kazakhstan. We couldn't get back to Turkmenistan, so I had to backtrack to Uzbekistan. And eventually we were going to try and go back into Russia, over the Caspian, through Russia, down through Chechnya, over the mountains into Georgia. So we were planning that, and I was about to get on a plane and go back. Now, I didn't believe I would be allowed back into Russia because, for example, I'd done a visa bounce into Kazakhstan from Kazakhstan at one point. A visa bounce meaning I have to renew the visa. And Kazakhstan refused me entry, and it was the only country that ever refused me entry. I tried twice. And it turns out because of what happened in Russia, I wasn't allowed into Kazakhstan because they have a security pact with the Russians. So I knew that I was flagged as a security risk. So I did not expect to get back into Russia. But we had there's no other way around it. We couldn't get back into Iran, couldn't even get back into Turkmenistan. So I had to go try and get back into Russia. Well, I'm about to get on a plane, and then Russia did the stupid in Ukraine. And that was it. So we were like, no, we're not going back into Russia. So Russia was off the board. The Taliban had just taken Afghanistan again. Turkmenistan was never going to open up, so we were stuck. We ended up being stuck on Kazakhstan on the wrong side of the Caspian Sea. And there was just no way of getting around the Caspian. But there were Plan C, which was Plan Crazy, which was to swim.
Oh my God.
Because there was no other way, right? So all the Caspian was, to me, was a water obstacle. But in this case, it was like a 300-kilometer water obstacle. And I can't really swim, but, we've done rivers, we've done the Arc, swam around the Bering Strait. Let's just do something like that. So, we had to then spend another year planning how we were going to try and swim the Caspian. Not what I wanted to do, but I ended up teaming up with another world walker, Angela Maxwell, from the camel journey that we've been on. And she joined me to do the swim. So she walked with me to the coast in Kazakhstan. And then we put our feelers out, started talking to boat owners, and because we needed a safety boat, right? So the plan was to swim 10 kilometers a day. So then we had to organize this really expensive and difficult trip across the Caspian Sea, which proved to be very difficult. The politics, again, right? Because the Caspian Sea is somewhat controversial because of all the countries that surround it. And only recently, of all of these nations, Russia, Iran, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, come to some kind of agreement as to how to administer the Caspian Sea. And that only happened recently after like 20 years of negotiations or something. So we were kind of stepping into all of this. And the oil industry has a big say in it as well, because the amount of oil extraction in the Caspian is huge right now. So there was a lot to negotiate, and we had to get the money from my sponsors to pay the boats and things. And eventually, though, we ended up talking to the Azerbaijanis. And the I got contact of a contact and ended up in front of the sports minister for sports and youth in Azerbaijan. And we sat with him and we said, look, this is what we want to do. We want to swim across this. Blah, blah, blah. And this was like the second year. The first year we failed. We couldn't get it nailed down. So the second year we were talking to the Azerbaijanis, and the Azerbaijani sports minister was like, well, this is awesome. This is great. But he'd be like, I'll be damned if foreigners are going to swim across our lake first. So he said, look, we'll help you if 2 Azerbaijanis can swim with you. So we're like, deal. So they got the Coast Guard to become our support ship. And the Coast Guard would support us across the Caspian.
Oh, my God.
So we had this nice big, Coast Guard ship vessel with support boats attached to it and everything. And it ended up being a 4-person team. There was me, Angela Maxwell, and then there were 2 teenagers who were from the national swim team. These were like 16 and 18, these kids. And they were real swimmers, professional swimmers. And then there was me and Angela, who were like in our 40s and 50s and can't swim for love nor money, but she could swim pretty good, I guess. But it was an odd team to be swimming across the Caspian. But everything went to plan. We managed to get those 10 kilometers. In fact, once we got away from the coast into the middle of the Caspian, you get this huge gyro, so that the currents within the Caspian. We managed, and this is what the plan had been, was to find this gyro, and it picked us up. So we ended up being able to do 15, I think the maximum was 16 kilometers a day with the help of the currents, which literally take us across towards Azerbaijan. And bang on time. I think it was like we arrived off the coast 30 days, which is what we had imagined it would have taken us. So it all went to plan. And we had a bit of a party on the end. On the arrival, the Azerbaijanis had a welcoming party. We got our visa stamped on arrival on the beach, and that was it. That was the Caspian out of the way.
Oh, my God.
It worked rather well. And it took us, I think, 30 days. We swam 288 kilometers during that time. So we would swim that time, we would sleep on the boat, and then they put us back in the water because they just tracked the GPS point where they take me out and put me back. So we start and stop at the same place as was required by the rules. And that was it. That got me to Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey.
Turkey.
And then we arrived at Europe.
For a visa for Turkey for some time, right?
No, it was easy. The problem with Turkey was the Bosphorus, the bridge, right? Because you can't walk across the bridge.
Yes.
So I arrived there and I asked them nicely, the local government, if I could use the bridge. Only took a week, and they were like, yeah. So we got an escort across the bridge over the Bosphorus, and that was great.
Did you meet during that whole amazing experience? You're a hero. You've been to 25 countries, I think.
It's close to that now. I'd have to count again. 22, 23, 25, something like that,
Have you met, probably you have, hostile people? Aside from politicians and army and stuff, I mean, people who didn't want your good.
Well, this is important because this is, I get to talk to a lot of school children in classes and things, right? I give a lot of presentations at school. So it's very good to be able to stand in front of those kids and tell them that 99.99999% of humanity are the best people you will ever meet.
Great.
That is my experience. So despite what you see on the 24-hour news cycle, the world is a lot safer place than you might think, or at least people, as far as an individual traveler is concerned, is you will meet the best of the best. Like I have met almost no real problematic people, other than governments and security forces, which can, have a job to do and have their own issues going on. I mean, I'm not naive. There are some nuances to this. Human beings as individuals, like when you meet someone on the road, from whatever background, human to human, you're all the same. We're all the same. You have that cultural thing is wafer thin. Beneath that, we all want the same things in life. The same things make us laugh, make us cry. They all understand what I'm doing. It makes sense. So you can connect with people around the world. You might not speak the language. It doesn't matter. You can still communicate. We still figure it out.
Amazing.
And that is an important message, that people need to be constantly reminded that the world is amazing on an individual basis. Now, humans in groups become a very different thing.
Because, Sartre, who said, hell is the others. So people can be very hostile.
Right. As individuals are great, but once you start getting us into groups and etc., then we become a little problematic. But so there is that. But from my experience, I've just met the best of the best through any of these countries, be it in China, be it Russia, be it the United States, Latin America, wherever. It's all been the same. The
most kind thing that a stranger did to you, mate?
I mean, it happens all the time. There have been times, like I mentioned about when I was sick in Peru and they nursed me back to health. There are days when you're in a bad state, you got no food, no water, and someone will just turn up in a car and, oh, look, we got food, we got water. That means the world to you. There have been times where, I've been really struggling, and just to have someone stop and talk to you can be a very important thing. They'll let you in their homes in the Arctic somewhere when you're, get to a village. There's been times where I've arrived in a village in a very bad state, in 1 o'clock in the morning, having almost froze to death in a storm or something. And people have just pulled me into their homes, put me in front of the fire. Every step. And here in Sofia, I arrived, my equipment was broken. I was like running out of time. I went, okay, I've got to get this fixed. So I went on social media. I said, anybody can help me. That day, people.
Where do you sleep in Sofia?
I'm in a hotel right now, just down.
Oh, okay.
Literally just down the street from.
Oh, okay. Not in a tent.
Not in a tent. So I've got a couple of days here in a hotel. A lot of things we want to do here: fix, clean, rest. I'm going to have a meeting on Saturday night with people that follow me on social media from TikTok here. So that's going to be interesting. But yeah, people, people just find me and help me out. I needed some help to get stuff fixed, and people showed up, found me, and said, bring your equipment. We know a place to fix it.
Was there a place during your trip where you felt really at home and you wanted to stay for good?
Yes. There are like these home bases when we're doing these gaps and things. For example, while I was working on the Darien Gap, I stayed in Medellin, Colombia, fell in love in Medellin, Colombia, loved Colombia. So it kind of became a bit of a home. Fairbanks, Alaska was kind of the home base for the whole operation across the Arctic, Alaska, the Bering Strait into Siberia. I would come back to Fairbanks when I had to leave Russia. So I got to know a lot of people, and that became very much a home. We spent a lot of time there. And then in Mexico, that we have a place in Mexico where when things go wrong and I'm stuck, I go back to Mexico because I have to. The visa thing means I have to jump around. I can't stay in one country on these visas, so you got to keep moving around. But Mexico was one of the places we would, go back to. Easy to live, cheap, warm. I don't need a lot of things to be there. So Mexico became a fallback when we had all these problems like the pandemic, visa bans, the financial crises. So yeah, you have these little spots in the world that you spend more time in than other places that become home bases.
To an end, and does that scare you?
Terrifying. It's a little worrying. Yeah, because your whole purpose for life started to disappear. I only know myself as the guy who gets up every damn day and focuses on trying to get back home, ultimately, right? That's the goal, is to get home.
When you get home?
When you get home,
what happens next?
There's nothing worse. The only thing worse than having a dream you can't complete is completing a dream. because then what do you do? So, I'm going to get to the end of this 50. I'll be 57 at that point. And
but that's with climbers always. I was wondering, when you get to Everest, to the top,
right, when you have a long-term dream, long-term passion, once you've done it, what's next kind of thing. And once you spend 27, 28 years, it'll be when I get home, it's everything I am right now. I don't own anything. I have no assets. What am I going to do for living right now? So I'm kind of in this
backwards.
No. This thing has to end, and it has to end soon because I'm getting older and I'm starting to feel it.
You have to write the book first of all.
Well, the books,
a film.
I've been talking about it a lot.
Series,
the documentaries and stuff that we might.
And that way you'll return to the places you've been.
Well, that would be great if we could do that. I don't know.
Do it, please. I'm offering right now. I have a great producer behind my. We've got awarded for my docu-series recently. So, yes, this is it's treasure. You're a living treasure, and your experience has to be shown to the world.
Right. This, it is an interesting story. We have a lot of video footage for the last 15 years.
You see?
So, there was a lot we could do with that.
Amazing. I mean, it's treasury.
Yeah.
And that the fact that you're talking to kids also, so you give them perspective, you give them broaden their horizon, give them the idea that everything is possible.
Yeah, that's an important thing. Broadening those horizons is a very important thing. And I think, that's when you look at when people ask me the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing, and I credit my father for broadening my horizons. I remember a couple of times we had that conversation where he used to talk about people's lives as circles. He's like, these people in this town, they live in a small circle. Mm-hmm. It goes from their home, their workplace, the bar, the football ground. That's their circle. And he was always pushing for me to broaden those circles and get it, And eventually I took that circle around the world, and that's,
It's amazing.
And I think young people need to be...
But then you'll get to Guinness.
Well, Guinness is whatever.
You don't care about that.
No. People get Guinness for anything these days. You can pay Guinness to get in their Guinness Book of Records, so it doesn't really, whatever. But that circle thing, and children especially need to travel. Travel is going to be a very important part of anyone's education, or it should be.
Because it is true. It's a cliche, but the world is a global village now.
And it should. That's the goal. That's what we should be aiming for. Is to dissolve those borders in as many ways as we can, because those borders create the friction points, as we see now in various cultures around the world. As long as those borders exist, as long as there's us and there's them, there's going to be a reason to fight for something.
Absolutely.
And how do you lessen the impact of that? How do you get around that problem? You listen to the astronauts when they come back from the UK and they have this overview effect, but you look at the Earth from space without those borders and things, and they'll come back slightly, maladjusted with these wonderful ideas of how we should be living in harmony. And it's great. But unfortunately, our nature doesn't want us to be that way.
Where we started, actually.
Right back to that conversation at the beginning, right?
About the human
our tribal nature, and about how nature wants us to be that way because it wants the competitive.
How did this whole experience reshape your mind? What did you learn? Patience. Obviously, you were able to survive in any circumstances, but what philosophy? How did it change your philosophy? Resilience.
It's hard to say that the journey changed me just as much as life changes. 27 years of doing anything will change you. We're all different people, right? From where we were in our 20s. We're different people. So it's hard to say what part of the journey may have been responsible. But, you like what we were talking about, I came from the military, so I didn't see the best of humanity, especially, during many years in Northern Ireland and things. And so I got to see the worst of humanity. For me, that big surprise was seeing how much the world helped me. It was that conversation that we're having about the 99.99999% of the world are great people. So that was, a lesson for me in the early days, has been a lesson continually. As far as how I managed to overcome all these obstacles, it was a mindset. I think that's a very important thing. I didn't try to walk around the world. We didn't say, let's give this a go. We came into this with,
we will do it.
This is what we are going to do, or I don't get home.
Yeah.
So I burned my bridges at home, and mentally, I had that right mindset where it was mission.
But then now you have to meet your family again. You actually don't know these people.
There is some distance between us. Yeah, there's distance between me, what used to be my culture, my society, my nation. There is a lot of differences. I haven't grown up within the same. And your culture decided that
Brexit will be their way. I mean, it's very interesting.
Right. So their politics, their nature, they're in their own kind of media bubble, being fed and working within that, environment, that media environment that I'm not a part of because I'm outside. So, because I've been on the move, I haven't really been in those bubbles. I've seen people's perspectives.
So good for you.
Which for me feels like I keep a balance. I feel like I have a good balanced view. I've met people from so many different backgrounds and so many different points of view. From an FSB officer, talking to him about why he joined the FSB and his view on how America is closing in on them and how he feels like he joined the FSB to defend his country because America is, bearing down on them. That perspective from talking to those people, talking to people, the politics in America is crazy. So I've got to talk to people from, the sandal wearing side to the Second Amendment nut jobs with guns and stuff. And I've lived with all of these people and seen the world from that politics in the US on the ground, close, very close. So that's been a very interesting experience. And now I'm entering Europe and, I'm already seeing the politics is kind of playing into things as I enter Europe, people having those conversations with me that I haven't been aware of, or at least haven't had, individual perspectives on this stuff. I get a lot of it from home. A lot of my friends and people from home message me talking about this stuff a lot. So apparently I'm in for a shock and a surprise when I get home. But it's been interesting kind of walking the gaps, walking the cracks between all of these different cultures and experiences and opinions, but always been on the outside. That's done me. I think it's done me good. Put me in a good place, I think.
You wouldn't choose any if you can move the time machine backwards. You wouldn't choose anything else for your life. No.
If it's not broken, don't change it. Don't try and fix it. Everything has worked great. We managed to pull off some magical stunts. We managed to get it over the Bering Strait. We managed to continue in Russia, despite the Russian SFB trying to stop me. We got through China without them stopping me. Amazing. We've managed to do all these distances on the roads, never been hit by a car.
That's a story that has to be told.
Which is just incredible because I've seen everything on those roads. I've seen everything on those roads. And the fact that, I roll my dice every day on those roads and never been hit by a car, never been gravely ill. So I feel like I've gotten away with a lot. And I just keep surprising myself with how many of these barriers we get beyond, find solutions to, and move on. And now we're looking at the Channel Tunnel and, it's almost done.
And you're afraid. For the first time, you're afraid.
Well, yeah, now life's going to get weird. And I'm a little bit,
It's more difficult to end it than to start it.
Yeah. It's all going to go away. So that's going to be a weird thing. So, what am I going to do next? I mean, I'm working on a few things. I have other interests.
Like?
Well, for me, it's my other passion is science literacy and science engagement. So that's one of the things I want to work on when I get back to the UK. If I have a choice in what I do for the rest of my life, the next fight is science literacy and science engagement.
Very good.
And I've started a non-profit to try and to work on that as well. And hopefully what I can do is once I get home, I will just throw myself into that 100%.
Challenge.
And that will hopefully stop me from going insane and losing my mind and not knowing what to do. So the plan really is to not sit around and think about things too much, is to get busy.
Absolutely.
So if I can get busy as soon as I get home with something, another passion, something I can really throw myself into, heart and mind, in this case, science literacy, science engagement for young people, that is what I want to do. And that's what I'll be working on when I get home, hopefully.
Yeah.
And of course,
because
the rest of this journey.
I understand what is to be something that you really love, and you've been you invested in it. I had this type of work where I invested myself, and when it was taken from you, in our case because of censorship, in your case because this is the end of your journey, you feel in an empty, like totally empty space, but then keeping busy and keeping doing the things you have to do, because there should be people like you in this world, exploring it, exposing it, showing it to us who stay at home. There was this book by Kelman, Measuring the World, and one scientist was staying at home and writing it scientifically, mathematically, making his observations from his room, and the other one was going like you and doing the same thing but through experience empirically, and in the end they met and they made the same conclusions. But
right,
it's
there's an Einstein, a quote that's accredited to Einstein about experience is learning, everything else is just information.
Absolutely. Your experience, it's priceless. So you won't be unbusy. I'm sure there will be so much more to do.
Yes, I think I'll get busy. And I'm good at doing things when I put my mind to it. So I like to think I'm gonna be successful on that front too.
Nothing is impossible for you, which is such a good lesson for all of us.
Within limits.
Nothing is impossible.
Some caveats there, but I'll run with that. I'll take it.
But thank you so much. I would love to continue this conversation in different sorts of ways, and we'll talk about this later. Thank you very much for sharing this time with us and our viewers. I'm sure that they'll be very, very inspired by you, Carl. And yeah, you're great.
Thank you.
We're Off News. I'm Miss Krangelova, and just go out and explore the world.
The big world. A lot happening.